This is Michael Popok with a Legal AF Hot Take. I want to do a deep dive into the actual criminal statutes that are in play in the historic trial of Donald Trump, first time an ex-president has ever been tried criminally, this time in New York. I'm going to call it the election interference case because at the heart of the case, the felony that's being charged and being tried and prosecuted by the Manhattan DA's office, the felony involves election fraud. So let's call it for what it is. I've often struggled with, is it the Stormy Daniels hush money business record fraud case? No, it's the election interference fraud case, because we wouldn't be talking about it as a felony in New York, Class E felony, yes, but a felony nonetheless, unless there was this second crime that needs to be charged. Let me explain all that. Let me break it down right here on this hot take. You'll be able to hold on to this information as sort of a building block, a lens, if you will, to look through as you hear the next 6 weeks of trial testimony and trial updates on the MeidasTouch Network and on Legal AF. I think at the heart, we have to distill this down to its simplest constituent parts, paint and primary colors that you can understand it. And this is a straightforward case. It's not that complicated. Donald Trump's, as alleged, his multi-stepped orchestrated conspiracy to hide the payoff of Stormy Daniels as an illegal campaign contribution to himself while he was in a fight with Hillary Clinton to try to win the presidency, which he ultimately did, to try to get rid of these women who were coming forward claiming that they had had sex with him outside his marriage at a time when he was already reeling politically and personally with his wife Melania from the Access Hollywood hot mic moment from 3 years earlier that got leaked in October of the campaign year in 2016, where he said he could sexually assault women and get away with it because he was a celebrity. That's why, as alleged in the indictment, he orchestrated these things. But what are the crimes? A lot of people in your life may tell you, Donald Trump will tell you, or try to tell you, this is a kangaroo court. This is a communist trial. This is being tried in abstention of being gagged, as he's not being gagged, obviously, and telling you all of this and all of his filings. But I've seen a lot of writings on social media and people saying, this is a nothing of a case, nothing to see here. Why is this the trial? Because it was a matter of election interference. Let me tell you why. New York has a series of laws that require all New York corporations to accurately record their transactions in their books and records. And if you don't, and you try to conceal something, for instance, in the case of Donald Trump, instead of listing it as a payoff to Stormy Daniels so that his wife and the American electorate wouldn't learn of his sexual misconduct and his having sex outside of his marriage, which may not go down well with the fundamentalist Christians that support him, he wrote down that it was and paid it out over months as a charge to Michael Cohen for legal expenses and a bonus related to his legal services when it was nothing of the kind. It was an indirect Rube Goldberg contraption way to pay Stormy Daniels through Michael Cohen taking out a home equity line, paying Stormy Daniels and getting repaid from Donald Trump and having it listed in the books and records falsely. If it was just that and that alone, I'm not even sure we'd be trying this case. I certainly wouldn't be doing a hot take on it. It would just be a misdemeanor in New York. Now, Donald Trump may take an easy way out. He may argue to the judge at some point, not now, closer to the end of the trial, that the jury should be instructed that they can find, instead of a felony, and I'll talk about the felony right next, they could actually just convict him of the underlying falsification of the documents, the books and records, and just convict him of a misdemeanor, meaning basically no jail time. He'll do that if he thinks politically, he'll calculate whether he can survive politically doing that. Put that aside for a minute. I did another hot take on that. Let me focus on the crimes, right? So the crimes here under Penal Law 175, Chapter 175, say that if all you do is make fraudulent entries into the books and records of a company, you commit a crime, but it's a misdemeanor. How did we get to a felony? It's because in 175.10 of the penal law, and I'll read it to you in a moment, it says in effect that if you're making those false entries in your books and records in furtherance of another crime, then you're up to a felony. In other words, you've bootstrapped it up to a felony. You've ratcheted it up. It's a two-step process. False record keeping, yes, a misdemeanor crime. In furtherance of another crime, boom, felony. What is the second crime? Right? I feel like I'm talking about, was there a second shooter in the Kennedy in the Kennedy assassination investigation? What is the second crime? The second crime, as Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor, has laid out time and time again, centers around election interference. That's why I started the hot take with, let's call this for what it is. It's an election interference case. It was the first of them. It was the dress rehearsal for 2020. He thought he got away with it in 2016, so he did it again in 2020. He complains a lot, Donald Trump. They waited 7 years to bring this trial. Not true. They were investigating it for a long time, but using prosecutorial discretion, the information didn't all coalesce until about 1.5 to 2 years ago. Okay. But again, Donald Trump didn't have the benefit of having been indicted. So when he did his 2020 plan, he thought he had gotten away with it in 2016. So that's not reported that often. The 2020 election interference, see the Jan 6 report, see the DC election interference case and Jack Smith, see the Georgia election interference case with Fulton County DA Fani Willis. All of that, he thought he'd gotten away with it in 2016. What was the election interference? There's two statutes in New York. There's one statute in New York and one statute that's federal. And the federal one is relatively straightforward. It's the one that Michael Cohen was convicted of for this very same hush money business record fraud cover-up related to Stormy Daniels. People forget that. Michael Cohen got sentenced to 3 years in jail. Got out a little early because of COVID and good behavior, but he was sentenced to 3 years in jail. He paid a $1.39 million restitution. He paid $500,000 in fines and another $100,000 as well. Michael Cohen served his debt to society. He got convicted. In fact, many of the commissioners of the Federal Election Commission questioned why Donald Trump wasn't being charged. Well, during that same period, Donald Trump was in office, and he ran the Department of Justice through his various rotating group of attorney generals, one of them being Bill Barr. So Donald Trump wasn't going to prosecute himself. That's not happening. So who took the fall? Who's the fall guy? Michael Cohen, who's now testifying. All right, that's the closed loop circuit there, the closed circuit loop there for Michael Cohen. That's the same law. There's two of them that are crimes, one federal, one state. The federal one is a violation of the Federal Election Campaign Act. And it says basically a campaign cannot accept a contribution, cash, in kind, property, whatever value, that benefits the campaign over a certain limit. The $130,000 that was paid to Stormy Daniels to make her story go away, poof, right? By Donald Trump through Michael Cohen, through the National Enquirer, through Alan Weisselberg, the now disgraced, twice convicted chief financial officer for Donald Trump, right? That is the Federal Election Campaign Act violation because that $130,000 is well over the limit. I think the limit at the time was about $6,000 or $8,000. So it blew through the limit. That's a crime. It's a crime. It's not often prosecuted. It doesn't get you a lot of jail time, but it's a crime. Michael Cohen, 3-year sentence, exact same crime, same set of facts, same Stormy Daniels, same Donald Trump, same orchestrated conspiracy, right? It's always been a head scratcher. Michael Cohen goes to jail for something, and we're questioning the propriety of the indictment against Donald Trump for the exact same thing when he's the one that orchestrated it. At least 2 commissioners of the Federal Election Commission were like, why are we prosecuting Michael Cohen? What happened to Donald Trump? Right. We're now answering that question in the upcoming trial. That's one crime. You need one other crime that the business record fraud is in furtherance of to ratchet it up in New York to a felony. The other one that the Manhattan DA is hanging their hat on, it's an either or, is a New York election law violation under what we call 14-126, which basically says that if the candidate receives the benefit, right, of a campaign contribution that they shouldn't have gotten or tries to interfere with the election, they violate criminal law in New York, right? Let me read to you particularly what is the 14-126 in New York, and I'll also read to you what is 175.10 on the business record fraud. On the 175.10, falsifying business records in the first degree, it says that under our law, a person is guilty of falsifying business records. This is from the model jury instruction that goes to the jury in the first degree when with intent to defraud that includes an intent to commit another crime. That's the second crime. Or to aid or conceal the commission thereof of the second crime. That person alters, erases, obliterates, deletes, removes, or destroys a true entry in the business record, or omits to make a true entry in the business record in violation of a duty to do so, right? So that's what we had. We had the alteration and a false entry into the books and records to cover up the election fraud. Now let me read to you the 14-26. 14-26 under New York law, a violation of which is a crime, says that any person who acting as or on behalf of a candidate, so the candidate himself is fine, under circumstances evincing an intent to violate such law, that's the criminal intent, unlawfully accepts a contribution in excess of a contribution limitation established in this article shall be required to refund such excess amount and subject to a civil penalty equal to the excess amount plus $10,000. It's also a crime. Now, Donald Trump tried to argue to both Judge Mershon, who presides over the case that's starting in New York, and Judge Hellerstein, who was a federal judge in the Southern District of New York, where Donald Trump went running to back in May last May, in which he argued the Federal Election Commission Act and the Federal Election Campaign Act controls, and you can only get me there, and you can't get me for the other thing, and you can't make it two crimes. And both judges were like, "What are you talking about?" There is, as alleged in the indictment, you have a second crime. Now, there's a unique thing here that I've said in prior hot takes, but I want to make it clear here. There is no requirement, nor has Donald Trump been charged with the second crime. That's very unique. Some people are getting confused on that, and I want to straighten it out right here. There is no requirement under 175.10, the falsifying business records, that second crime, those election interference crimes, state and federal, that I've outlined here on the hot take, that it actually be charged as a crime. Donald Trump has 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree because it's in furtherance of another crime. That's the entire case against him. The jury will be taught by the judge, and at the time of the instructions and even an opening statement, there is a statute in New York under the model rules called 175.10, the penal law, that requires two things: that you find that there was a business record false entry, and that it was done in furtherance of a second crime. You will hear evidence of the second crime. That second crime will be fill in the blank. I mean, Alvin Bragg could come up with something else like a tax evasion issue, that those business deductions that were obviously taken by Donald Trump for paying Michael Cohen back, acting like they were legal fees, a business deduction when they weren't, could also form that second crime. But I think the focus, as best I understand the indictment and what I've read and researched, is it's going to be the New York election law 14-126 and the Federal Election Campaign Act, same criminal act Michael Cohen was convicted under. And they'll be told, there is no charge of that in this case. There's no requirement that the prosecutor actually charge that. It's just that you, based on the weight of the evidence and based on the finding of no reasonable doubt that false record was done to further that election crime, that we are an election interference case at bottom, not a Donald Trump had sex with Stormy Daniels and paid her off case. And that's going to be done early on. That orientation of the jury is going to be done early on by the prosecutors, and we're going to follow it. There's 6 weeks of trial. Here's the viewer guide: Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. Don't go anywhere with the MeidasTouch Network and Legal AF. That's trial days. Wednesday, trial's dark. Judge gets to do other things that day. 4 days a week for 6 to 8 weeks. That's going to be the trial. First week or so is going to be jury selection process. We probably won't get to substantive matters until very late this coming week or early next week. But I wanted you to understand the fundamental substantive criminal laws that are in play and that unique little hiccup there that I just described to you, which is actually an advantage for the prosecution, that they don't have to charge Donald Trump and didn't charge Donald Trump with the actual second underlying crime. They just have to prove that that was the overt acts, if you will, that it wasn't just done to enter, because they felt like goofing around and not wanting to piss off Melania or something, and they entered in the books and records that it was a lawyer payment for legal services to Michael Cohen when it wasn't. It was repaying him for having paid Stormy Daniels the hush money. And so if the jury believes that, they convict. And there's 34 checks and 34 false entries in the business records for Donald Trump, right? It was a 34-step process. Nothing says I've got nothing to hide and I'm not committing a crime, like creating 34 separate checks paid out over time to Michael Cohen with 34 separate false entries and having that be your fake paper trail. That says I'm an innocent man, doesn't it? Because that's what you do when you think paying somebody off is proper and you're doing it for proper non-criminal purposes, right? Okay. So having set that aside for a moment, that's what's going to happen. And everything, as a trial lawyer, I'll tell you straight, everything that I do in a courtroom when there's a jury trial is determined and is impacted by what the jury instructions look like for the crimes or the claims that are involved in the case. I need to know those cold when I start. Everything I do, everything I say, everything I present, every witness I put on, and every piece of document or evidence that is presented, I do it through the filter of how does this relate to an element of the claim or charge in the case or defense. And that's what these lawyers are going to be doing. So I want you to be able to do it. I want you to be able to have that filter so that you can analyze when Ben or me or Karen get on the air on a hot take or legal AF, so you understand, because you understand the jury instructions and the charges underneath. And you can fight back when you talk to friends and family or people in your life when they say, "This is a BS case, there's no second crime, there's no charge." You can say, "Yes, there is. Popok told me 175.10, falsifying business records in the first degree, requiring a second crime. It doesn't have to be charged. And there's 34 felony counts related to the checks and the false entries related to Donald Trump orchestrating this conspiracy along with Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen already went to jail for one of the crimes that's been charged under the Federal Election Campaign Act." That's what I want you to say, in your own words, of course. So follow me on Legal AF. We do it on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You'll find out why we call it Legal AF. We curate the top 5 stories at the intersection of law and politics. Sometimes it's a lot of Trump. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's civil rights and constitutional rights and women's rights and abortion rights and the Supreme Court. And sometimes we don't even get around to Trump that week. It depends on what's going on in his life that we feel is important to report to you. We do it as practicing lawyers in the courtrooms that we talk about. How unique, lawyers knowing what they're talking about at the intersection of law and politics. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.